Okay, this is review video number 3 on federalism. What is federalism? Federalism is the constitutionally protected separation of powers between a national government, in the United States we call it the federal government, and multiple subnational units, in the United States we call those the states. Decentralization merely refers to the quantity of functions exercised by those subnational units. So, a strong federal system clearly demarcates, right, places a line between subnational and national powers, what the federal government's job to do and what the state's job is to do. A strongly decentralized system gives lots of powers to the states, the subnational units. What are some of the advantages of federalism? Well, federalism enables Americans to satisfy different preferences about the quality and quantity of public goods that they consume, so it gives them more choice. It also keeps local issues from encroaching on Congress's time. In so doing, it promotes a division of labor. It keeps the people who are most informed and who most benefit from a public good in charge of that public good and in charge of paying for that public good. In that sense, it promotes accountability. And finally, competition between jurisdictions, right, between states for tax revenue and for prestige, keeps those states' governments efficient and the customer or the citizen happy. This is what we call a taboo competition. All right, what about disadvantages of federalism? Well, that competition that we just talked about for investment and jobs and people can lead to what we call races to the bottom. This is a kind of a collective action problem where everybody fears that the other will underbid them, and then everybody has lower environmental or labor standards than they otherwise would have, or would want, should we say. When people also choose to self-sort in this way, like people who like high taxes and lots of government services go one place, people who like low taxes and low government services go somewhere else. They also tend to self-sort in objectionable ways. That is to say, they tend to self-sort by income or by race. And what this means is that one's quality of life can vary substantially simply based on where one happens to be born or where one happens to have a job. These kinds of inequalities are potentially problematic. Finally, another reason that federalism is potentially problematic is that those people whom the government knows cannot move for a variety of reasons, that is to say their jobs are tied to a particular location or state, like a mine, for example, or a community that's very poor and has a hard time moving. Those communities aren't as well served because the government knows that they're not going to move. Another reason federalism might be problematic is that local majorities, left unsupervised, can sometimes oppress local minorities. Think of the Jim Crow South, for example. Jim Crow South arguably was enabled by federalism, despite the fact that a majority of the population in the United States was against racial discrimination. And finally, federalism can be somewhat inefficient if the jurisdictions aren't clearly defined. For example, if you own a business and you need to get multiple permits from the city, the county, the state, and the national government in order to operate your business, you're duplicating a lot of efforts if each of them requires the same inspection, for example. Another question that surrounds federalism is whether federalism promotes freedom. Clearly, some free countries are not federal. Think of the United Kingdom, France, the Netherlands, Sweden, or Denmark. All of these countries are quite free by all measures, but they're not federal countries. They're unitary countries. On the other hand, we have some unfree countries have sometime or other been federal in structure. Today, Russia is a federal country. Brazil in the 1960s, under its dictatorship, was a federal country. So the answer is not 100% clear. But one thing to bear in mind is that it's fairly difficult for totalitarian countries to be federal, since totalitarianism does not admit to checks or balances on the power of the central government. It's worth noting also that where there are distinct regional identities, federalism probably helps maintain the autonomy of these subnational cultures or groups. You could think of the Quebecois in Canada, you could think of Bavarians within Germany, you could think of various national minorities within Russia and Brazil. Whereas it's probably been the case that unitary governments have often tried to suppress subnational identities. So you look at the record of Romania or Spain or Hungary or Turkey at suppressing, trying to create a national identity and marginalizing minority communities.